それではお時間になりましたので、本年度の国際仏教徒青年交換プログラム2021を開催させていただきたく思います。私は本日から3日間、司会進行と随時通訳を務めさせていただきます、大木正順と申します。Now it's time to start program. We'd like to start the International Intercultural Buddhist Youth Exchange Program 2021. I'm Shojin Ogi, an MC and an interpreter while the program for 3 days. それでは早速本イベントの主催者からイベント開催の挨拶がございます。まずはじめに全日本仏教青年会谷公認理事長、続きまして世界仏教徒青年連盟村山博雅会長より開会の挨拶をいただきます。それでは谷さん、村山さん、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。First of all, we'd like to start from the opening remarks from the sponsors. First, Rev. Konin Tani, President of All Japan Young Buddhist Association, and followingly, Rev. Hakuga Murayama, President of World Fellowship of Buddhist Youth, WFBY. Rev. Tani and Rev. Murayama, please go ahead.
皆様、本日は初のオンライン開催となります国際仏教徒青年交換プログラム2021にご参加いただき誠にありがとうございます。私は本イベントを主催させていただいております全日本仏教青年会理事長の谷です。
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for participating in IBYE2021. Let me introduce myself as Tani, President of JYBA.
この度、私の住んでいるところに新型コロナウイルスに関する緊急事態宣言が発令されましたので、主催者の一人として、断腸の思いながら開会式、その他すべてのプログラムを地元から Zoom で参加させていただくこととなりました。本日金曜日から日曜日までの3日間にわたるプログラムとなりますが、最後までどうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
I really wanted to join this program on the site, but unfortunately, my living area was issued the declaration of state of emergency, so I wasn't able to join this program on site. So I'm going to join this program through Zoom from today to Sunday. So during 3 days, I'd like to enjoy this program. Thank you.
それではご紹介に預かりました世界仏教徒青年連盟の村山博雅です。本日は多くの国の皆様方と貴重な時間を分かち合いたいというふうに思っております。さまざまなプログラムをご用意しております。緊急事態宣言に配慮いたしまして、この会場近郊の先生方にお越しをいただくことにしております。何卒楽しんでいただければと思います。よろしくお願いいたします。
Hello everyone, I'm Murayama, Rev. Murayama, President of the WFBY. I'd like to share the precious time with every one of you in many countries. And as of the programs, we intentionally selected the lecturers from the near the site of this temple in the consideration of the declaration of the state of emergency. So I hope we enjoyed this program with you until the Sunday. Thank you. 谷さん、村山さん、ありがとうございます。さて、今回の IBYE2021 ではサブタイトルがアフターコロナとパラダイムシフト、未来への希望と挙げられていますね。それではお二人にオンライン初開催となった IBYE2021 の趣旨について説明していただきたいと思います。Rev. Tani and Rev. Murayama, thank you very much for your addressing. speaking of the IBYE subtitle, its title is the Hope in the Post-COVID-19 Era, Breaking Out from the CHRYSALIS. So I'd like both of you to explain the aim of the very first time of online IBYE 2021 program.
はい、現在、世界は新型コロナウイルスにより経済的そして全社会的に戦後最大の危機を迎えていると言えます。また今年は日本では東日本大震災から10年という節目を迎え、改めて人類の歩む道を考え直す機会をいただきました。
I'm thinking like in the present time, we are facing the great crisis in financially and then also the socially due to the COVID-19. And also in Japan, we turned 10 years since we received the unprecedented disaster called the Great East Japan Earthquake. And I think we had the great opportunity to reconsider the way of our humankind.
私たちは今まさに一人一人が人間としてあらゆることについての価値と行動の大転換を迫られていると思います。まさに大きなパラダイムシフトを迎えていると言えるでしょう。
I think we had a time to reconsider the value and an action, and then we have to change this moment, and then each of us have to think about these points. I think it's time of a paradigm shift.
失礼しました。パラダイムシフトという時代の言葉を聞きますと、2015年に国連で採択された持続可能な開発目標こと SDGs も私たちが生きている21世紀では欠かせない国際的な目標となっていることも忘れてはならないことを想起させます。
Speaking of the paradigm shift term, it reminds me the SDGs, the Sustainable Developmental Goals, which was selected or decided the United Nations in 2015. I think we need to focus on this point too.
SDGs といえば、私どもの親団体である世界仏教徒連盟では2018年に日本で世界大会を開催し、全日本仏教会とともに東京宣言を採択しました。そこで SDGs を支援しますと、しっかりと宣言をしております。
In addition, speaking of the SDGs, our mother the organization WFBY is also declared the Tokyo Declaration in 2018 when we had a worldwide conference in Japan, and then we decided we also support SDGs.
その世界大会の時に全日本仏教青年会も仏教 SDGs 守り継ぐそして未来へというシンポジウムを横浜の總持寺で同時開催いたしました。仏教という古の時代より先人たちが蓄えてきた知恵を SDGs という新しい物差しとともに私たちはどのように生きていくべきかという新たな取り組みが模索され、日本の仏教界に新たな1ページが刻まれたことと覚えております。
At that time, JYBA also organized a symposium entitled Buddhism and SDGs, the protection and transmitting toward the future. And then I believe that this symposium was one of the history in Japanese Buddhist communities to consider our future way of life with Buddhist wisdom and SDGs. よって SDGs というのは 村山さん、谷さん双方にとっても欠かせないキーワードということですね。I think like for both of you, SDGs is a very important keyword.
仏教の根本でもある祈りや慈悲、それらの輪を広げつつ、様々な活動を重ねていくことで、SDGs でも目標の17として挙げられている、全日本仏教青年会のスローガンでもある、パートナーシップを今後の仏教界でも実践していければと、日々考えながら過ごしております。
So number 17 of SDGs, the partnership, is very important in Buddhism. I think we need to practice with this sponsorship goals and the purpose.
もともとこの SDGs に掲げられている目標というのは、仏教の思想や哲学に大変親和性のあるものであり、それが私たちがSDGs を世界の社会的貢献のために一つのキーワードに掲げる理由です。
I believe that Buddhism is close to the SDGs, so that's why this is the main reason why we also cooperate with the SDGs, and also this is one of the social contribution to make the world peace. I think this is the keyword in Buddhism.
この SDGs に関係のあることですけれども、今世界の各地では気候変動による多くの自然災害が頻発しています。
This is relating to the SDGs, but recently we have the many natural disasters due to the climate change in the world.
その流れで今人間中心主義からの脱却、そして人類の活動が地球環境に甚大なる影響を与える時代というこの2つの言葉を合わせ、アントロポセンというキーワードが学問の世界で多く発信されています。
Accordingly, in academia, many people focus on the Anthropocenes, which is composed of the deviation from the Anthropocentrism, and then also the age of the thing that we need to really focus on the Earth peace and then Earth purifications.
村山さんがおっしゃる通り、人新世とも訳されるアンポルト船、こちらも日々の生活で意識せざるを得ない大切な危機の時代の必須用語となってきました。SDGs の実現可能性をより高めていくということを考慮しますと、先ほどのパラダイムシフトの時代とともに、もはや人類最大の命題の一つと言っても過言ではないかもしれません。
As Rev. Murayama mentions, I also believe Anthropocene and also paradigm shift is very important keyword to think about our humankind life.
パラダイムシフトと、そしてアフターコロナを見据えた上で、伝統的な仏教、宗教の英知と現代に必要とされた新しい価値意識の融合が、さらに新しい知的ムーブメントとして仏教と、そして宗教界から次世代を担う若者たちとともに、世界に発信できればというふうに思っております。
I hope IBYE program will be the light to make the future for the humankind as the new movement that with Buddhist wisdom and then another religious wisdom get together, and then also by incorporating the young youth people or work together.
世界的危機の今だからこそ、私たちはこの未来志向の本カンファレンスにおいて、人類に、世界に希望と未来と、そして光明を与えることができると、そう思っております。
I'm believing that even in this the world crisis, we can find the hope through the corporations.
ご参加いただく皆様には、 今まで話をさせていただきましたテーマについて、この後始まる3日間の有識者を招いた基調講演とともに、より知識を深めていただくことで、今後の人生に役立てていただける内容となっております。
I'd like you to enjoy the 3 days program. We invited many experts of the keynote lectures. So I hope you can use the knowledge and wisdom in your life. さて、今回の IBYE2021 では3日間にわたり基調講演の前に毎日祈りや黙祷の時間を設けているそうですね。村山さん、説明していただけますか？ So during the 3 days in IBYE2021 programs, so we have time to pray and then the silent prayer. So could you explain about this point?
はい、先ほども申し上げましたが、日本では東日本大震災から10年という節目を迎えて、また国内外では自然災害が頻発し、またコロナウイルスのパンデミックという人為、そして自然、地変、天変という災害が多く起こっています。そこで初日である今日は、各国の災害への祈りとして黙祷祭追悼、そして明日の土曜日にはコロナ収束への祈り、そして3日目には SDGs 達成への祈りを皆様と共に務めさせていただければと思っております。
As I mentioned earlier, we turned 10 years since we received a great East Japan earthquake in Japan, and then also now we have the many natural disasters in Japan, and then looking at the world, even like in the world, there are many natural disasters and tragedies, and then also in addition, we have a pandemic and then also the Delta variant of Coid-19, also the attacking the world. So the first day, I would like to do the prayer for the disaster in many countries. And next day, we'd like to do the prayer for the COVID-19's convergence. And then the final day, we'd like to pray for the achievement of SDGs. I would like to do together with you. それでは黙祷をお願いします。Now please join silent prayer.
ことなし。しかも常にこの菩提座に所したも。仰ぎ恋願わくは参謀して召喚の垂れたまえ。将来大悲死んだらにを不十す集むるところの功徳は。
東日本大震災並びに全国災害木古社諸奨励、全世界の天変地変人為による災害木古社諸奨励に栄光し、法治を将軍す。
おいねごところは共に仏門の光明台に上り、速やかに大悲の菩提道まどかにせんこと
皆様方におかれましては、ご一緒に追悼の祈りにご参加、お務めをいただき、誠にありがとうございました。心より御礼を申し上げます。
Thank you very much for joining the silent prayers. Let me express the sincere appreciation to each of you. Thank you very much. それでは次に IBYE2021 主催団体である世界仏教徒青年連盟と全日本仏教青年会のご紹介をさせていただきます。それではまず世界仏教徒青年連盟の紹介ビデオをご覧ください。Now I would like to introduce the WFBY and then JYBA, which were sponsor of IBYE2021. First of all, please watch the WFBY's introductory video.
Dr. Malala Sekar, a well-known Sri Lankan scholar, together with international Buddhists from 27 countries, founded the World Fellowship of Buddhists, WFB. The aim of the fellowship is to promote unity and harmony in humanity through the teaching of Lord Buddha's Dharma. 26 years later, at the WFB's 9th General Conference, a resolution was passed to establish a platform to develop an international network for Buddhist youth. Consequently, at the 10th General Conference in May 2515 BE or 1972, the youth section was formally founded as World Fellowship of Buddhist Youth, WFBY. The WFBY headquarters is currently situated in Bangkok, Thailand, which act as the secretariat with function which ensures dynamic communication by holding monthly HQ meetings and regular executive board meetings of the WFBY. The organization emphasizes three areas of priority in Buddhist Youth World development activities, including the Intercultural Buddhist Youth Exchange IBYE program, which is a first step to encouraging international Buddhist youth to explore and exchange their points of view with various cultures and practices in different countries. This exchange creates a mutual understanding and unity amongst the diverse Buddhist sects throughout the world. The exchange's alumni were then organized into an international Buddhist youth body, which was later called the WFBY International Club 25. Next, the executive board has been taking the step to set up the International Buddhist Youth Forum, IBYF, where young leader alumni of the IBYE program are able to share their voices with the executives and senior representatives of the regional centers. This program aims to empower youth involvement in planning the direction and process of international youth programs. WFBY also designed the program to strengthen and educate today's international Buddhist youth to become the future leaders by organizing the annual Buddhist Youth Leadership Training JYLT with emphasis on beginners and intermediate levels. Moreover, the Buddhist Youth Leadership Seminar BYLS is organized annually with the BYLT in order to bring the organization's executives closer to these future leaders. The WFBY has grown slowly until becoming a strong international Buddhist youth forum with an active membership in 38 regional centers located in 18 countries. The achievements of every member and your organization itself are solidarity and unity among international Buddhist youth, which will help protect and promote the precious Dharma of the Lord Buddha, so that it can flourish in the world forevermore. As long as every Buddhist community unites together as one, just as there is only one sun in the sky, the ideal of world peace will no longer be just a dream. Our little hands can change the world. For nearly 4 decades, WFBY has served as a center for international Buddhist societies to meet, share, and spread the Lord Buddha's message of peace to humankind. The commitment and dedication of every regional center and a member have proven that WFBY is now ready to take the next step in the mission of protecting, reviving, and propagating the Lord Buddha's precious Dharma. The WFBY is now ready to enter into the new age of the digital and globalized world. We shall not rest until this mission is accomplished.
世界仏教徒連盟の紹介ビデオをご覧いただきました。村山さん、補足説明等ございますでしょうか。
はい。
Thank you for watching the introductory video of WFBY. Reverend Murayama, do you have additional explanations?
当団体は、未来を担う青少年の、仏教に対する理解を深めて、そしてまた広めることを目的に結成された国際ネットワークです。ご覧になっていただいたビデオの通りで、第二次世界大戦後、アジア諸国に独立とともに仏教を通じた世界の連帯と調和を促進するために設立されたのが世界仏教徒連盟 WFB です。その WFB が若い仏教徒の国際的ネットワークを基 形成するために1972年正式に組織したのが WFBY です。
So we are the international network to promote the Buddhist understanding young Buddhist youth. And then as you watch the video, we were established in 1972 after the war in order to promote worldwide Buddhist cooperations and harmony. And then we educate the young Buddhists in the world.
現在、主にアジア地域16カ国、その国を代表する42の仏教団体が加盟する世界最大の仏教青年会に成長しています。本日開催させていただきましたこの IBYE のような国際交流プログラムを、またリーダー育成研修などを通じて世界中の青年仏教との交流を促進し、仏教に基づく人材育成に取り組んでいます。ユース世代の人間的成熟を促す原動力ともいえる団体だと考えています。
42 Buddhist organizations in 16 countries are belonging to the WFBY. And then we will focus on the program like IBYE program. So we're tackling on the effort to promote the young generation educations. And I think the WFBY is a motive power to educate the youth generations. 村山さん、ありがとうございました。今までに必要されていることでも、国際ネットワークというのは今まで以上に必要になってくるものかと思います。それでは次に全日本仏教青年会の紹介ビデオをご覧ください。Thank you very much for the Rev. Murayama. I think the WFBY's role is very important from now on. So now next, I would like to watch the introductory video of JYBA.
「 this year's General Conference held in Japan. The main theme is Compassion in Action. Many friends gather, pray together for this grand ceremony, Sensou-Ceremony, held in April 2018. The priests from the various Buddhist traditions gathered at the famous World Heritage Site, Todaiji Temple in Nara Prefecture, for this grand ceremony, Sensou-Ceremony, to pray for peace in the world by playing the different types of religious instruments that is distinctive to their tradition. On the roadside, the followers who had gathered put their hands together in prayer and observed the procession. Children holding the banner that stands for peace line up in front of the temple. The priests gather in front of the great Buddha statue as they are welcomed by the sounds of the beating taiko drums. The children sing a cheerful song praying for peace and love. With many followers in attendance, the blessing ceremony begins to pray for the peace. Let us take action in the restoration of all disaster areas.
全日本仏教青年会の紹介ビデオを見ていただきました。谷さん、補足説明等ございますでしょうか？ Thank you very much for watching the video. Rev. Tani, do you have additional explanations?
全日本仏教青年会も世界仏教と青年連盟や全日本仏教会と連携し、青年連盟と同時期1977年に設立されました。日本全国の宗派、地域の垣根を越えて活動する仏教青年団体で、日本最大の仏教青年会です。和を重んずる仏教精神のもと、仏教と相互の密接な連携や友好を図り、真に時代に相応する活動を展開しています。国際的には、世界仏教と青年連盟の日本センターとしての活動を行い、全世界の仏教徒と交流を深めつつ、仏教文化の宣揚と世界平和の進展に寄与することを目標にしております。
So JYBA is established in 1977 in cooperation with the World FBY and the Japan Buddhist Federation JBYF. And also the JYBA is the biggest young Buddhist association in Japan, and also we are transcending the sectarianism ideas, and then we will focus on the harmony in Buddhist spirits, and then we are doing many activities. So internationally, we work as the Japan Center of WFBY. So we'd like to focus on further the spread of the world peace through the Buddhist activities. さて、全日本仏教青年会が最も力を入れている活動の一つとして、世界平和祈願と災害仏庫者追悼を務める花祭り戦争法要というイベントが毎年開催されていると聞いております。昨年に続き、今年の春も新型コロナウイルス蔓延により中止になったようで残念でなりません。谷さん、長年東大寺で行われてきたという戦争法要についてお話しいただけますでしょうか？先ほどのビデオでも紹介されていましたね。So I heard the WFBY and JYBA is focused on the Southern Buddhist service in Flower Festival to pray for the world peace and then the DC through the disasters. So this Buddhist service is held annually. However, because of the Coid-19 the last year and then this year, so we had to cancel. So I'm sorry about that. So Rev. Tani, could you explain about the Southern Buddhist service, which has been continuing for a long time at the Todaiji temple?
それでは長年花祭り戦争法要の舞台となっております奈良の東大寺様の映像をまずご覧ください。
So before moving to the explanations, please watch the video about the Todaiji temple, and then we will hold the Southern Buddhist monks Buddhist services in Flower Festival.
「
全日本仏教青年会では、仏法交流と世界平和を願い、また災害仏庫者追悼のため、東大様において、花祭り戦争法要を開催してきました。全国各地より青年層が参集し、宗派の垣根を越え、お互いを尊重し合いながら、一般の人々と共に法要を営んでまいりました。
The JYBA has held this service, Buddhist service at the Todaiji temple in order to wish the further development of Buddha Dhamma and the world peace, and for the deceased through the natural disasters. All Buddhist monks all over Japan get together, and then we observe this service in cooperation, and then by go beyond the sectarianism.
昨年と今年は新型コロナウイルス感染拡大による国内情勢を鑑み中止となりましたが、来年こそはぜひ主体的なパートナーシップの実践とともに再び花祭り戦争法要を開催したいと考えております。世界の平和を願い、1300年の歴史を持つ東大様にて全国の僧侶や皆さんとともに祈りを捧げていきたいと考えております。
Although we had to cancel this service last year, and then this year due to the COVID-19, however, we are hoping to hold this service next year at the Todaiji temple, which has a 1300 years history in order to wish the world peace with all Buddhist monks in Japan. 谷さん、ありがとうございました。Thank you very much, Rev. Tani.
それでは、先ほどから、未来を担う将来の世代、またユース世代という言葉が、たくさん出てきております。世界仏教と青年連盟にはクラブ25というプロジェクトがありまして、次世代を担う青少年を対象に仏教を通じた教育、育成、研修を進めてきました。
I think you have heard some terms like the future generation or the youth generation. So the WFBY had a project entitled Club 25, which has an education system for the young generations.
その過程において青年仏教との国際交流を促進しながら 仏教のグローバル化を目的とするさまざまなプログラムをクラブ25として加盟各国にて展開し、そして全日本仏教青年会もクラブ25ジャパンを設立し、今後、その組織化と拡大充実を図って、そして仏教を通して高い見識を持つ青少年育成の一端を担えればというふうに考えています。この IBYE では今回新たに開催国日本のクラブ25ジャパンの紹介ビデオを実際の学生メンバーにより、制作させていただきました。若い情熱の結晶ともいえるビデオをどうぞご覧ください。
So Club 25 has the aim to promote the understanding of Buddhism in young generations, and JYBA also established a Club 25 in Japan, and then I hope this works further development of Club 25. And this times, the student member of Club 25 in Japan created the introductory video. So please watch their video, which has the great passions.
学生の皆様、素敵なビデオを作成いただきありがとうございました。日本の未来が少し明るくなったような、そんな気がする、素敵な映像でした。皆様の今後のご活躍を楽しみにしております。
Let me express the sincere appreciation each of your students. Thank you very much. I feel like Japan has a bright color and colorful, so I feel like that way. So I'm looking forward to your further and future activities. それでは次にいよいよ本日のメインプログラムともいえる釈徹宗先生と内田達先生による基調講演です。しかし開会から1時間以上経っておりますので、ここで10分間の休憩時間を取らせていただきます。So now we're moving on to the main program, the keynote lecture by Prof.Tatsuru Shaku and Prof.Tatsuru Uchida. However, it's been 1 hour since we started this program, so we take a 10 minutes break from now. So you can go away for 10 minutes, but please come back, okay? Promise me. See you in 10 minutes. さて皆様、そろそろパソコンの前にお戻りでしょうか。ここで本日の基調講演のお二人をご紹介させていただきます。それでは村山さん、よろしくお願いいたします。Hello, I guess you'll be back by now. So now, let me introduce, I would like to introduce the two lecturers of the keynote speakers. 出番で村山、Go ahead.
はい、それではまず釈鉄舟先生のご紹介させていただきます。テレビ出演もされていらっしゃいますのでご存知の方も多いかと思いますが、先生とは実は同じ大阪出身でございまして、私もありがたいことにいろんなご縁をいただいてまいりました。
So first of all, let me introduce the Rev. and Professor Teshu Shaku. I guess he's a very famous professor and Buddhist priest, and then he often appears on the TV show. So I think everybody knows him. So then he's from the same prefecture from Uzumi, and then I have the precious and great Dhamma connection with him.
先生はこの IBYE の会場になっています大阪萩の寺から車で20分ほどのところにございます浄土真宗本願寺派如来寺様でご住職をされていらっしゃいます。またさらにここから徒歩数分の駅前で宗教を通して社会を見るという理念のもとの学び屋として蓮心庵という寺小屋を主催していらっしゃいます。
The Rev. Professor Shaku is living in the 20 minutes area by car from this my temple, and then also he's the regent minister of the Nyoraiji temple of the Honganji school. And in addition, he established a kind of learning place. It's entitled Renshin An, and then the people can learn on the religious and in the society.
また先生は、崇愛大学人文学部教授、そして副学長も務めていらっしゃいます。専門は比較宗教思想人間学です。ご存知の通りテレビでは NHK の心の時代や、そして100分で名著などにも出演されていらっしゃいます。
So he's also the professor at the Sowa University. Also, he's the vice president of the university. His specialty in academia is comparative religions and anthropology. So as you know, in Japan, he often appeared on the TV show.
先生は宗教や学問という場を飛び越え、より良い共生社会を目指して特定非営利活動法人リライフ代表として高齢者や障害者の皆様への支援サービス、また地域の教育子育てに対するサポートや提言を行っていらっしゃいます。本当に多方面にてさまざまなご活躍をされていらっしゃいます。
So besides the religions and in the academia, so he's engaged in various social activities. For example, like he's supporting like the older people or disability people, and also he's supporting like the child education. So by going beyond the many the sphere, he's developed many activities.
また釈先生はこれからご紹介する内田達先生と同じく多くの本も出版されていらっしゃいます。視聴者の皆様方の中には作家として認知されている方も多いのではないかと思います。作家としての一冊だけご本を紹介いたしますと、落語に花咲く仏教という本で河合駿学芸賞を受賞されていらっしゃいます。
So Professor Shaku published many books like the Professor Uchida will introduce later. So and then one you might be able to you might know the Professor Shaku as a writer. So if we introduce one of his books, it will be the Rakugo ni Hanasaku Bukkyo. It's the Buddhist flowers in the Rakugo the talks. And then the works was received the award in Japan.
それでは 本日の記念すべき IBYE 初日の基調講演ですが、ただいまご紹介させていただきました釈徹宗先生と、そしてまた数々の著作が東アジア数カ国に翻訳出版されていらっしゃいます哲学者、作家、武道家のお顔をお持ちの内田達先生とのお二人でとのことです。まずは釈徹宗先生から30分ほどメッセージをいただきたいと思いますので、どうぞよろしくお願いをいたします。
So as the wish from the Professor Shaku, he would like to give the keynote lecture with the Professor Uchida, who is also the famous as a philosopher, a writer, and also martial arts artist. So first of all, I would like the Professor Shaku to give the keynote message, and then we move to the discussions. So Professor Shaku, now your stage. So as of the Zoom participants and in the speaking English area people, please press the interpretation button and please look at the down the screen, so you can find the press button interpretations. Now I pass on to the professional, the simultaneous interpreter.
はい、ご紹介いただきました釈でございます。国際仏教徒青年交換プログラム2021へのご参加、誠にご苦労様でございます。いつも私、あまりこのお話の準備などもせずに、
Normally, I don't prepare a proper speech and tend to speak freely, but due to issues of interpreting, I have prepared a document to read out. In the discussion with Professor Tatsuru Uchida, we hope that this will be, a basis for discussion. And I hope this presentation will also provide a keynote or a basis for the discussions in the following several days. As you know, the pandemic of the new coronavirus has not been contained. It's even in regions where we thought it was under control, we saw the outbreaks increasing again recently. Since this pandemic has occurred in Japan, the plague has been printed in large amounts. Hundreds of thousands of copies of The Plague have been printed, and a new translation has also been published for the first time in 70 years. Incidentally, in 2011, when the Great East Japan earthquake occurred, a large number of people read Kamono Chomei's Hojoki, which is a historical novel from the past. The Hojoki contains descriptions of the great earthquakes, famines, and fires that had occurred in Japan in the 12th century. The disaster is explained in great detail. So Hojoki is known as Japan's first novel to describe natural disasters. When people are facing crises like this, there's a tendency for people to read classics, it seems. When people are faced with a crisis situation, it seems they try to listen to the accumulated wisdom of mankind. I think the fact that these books are being read recently is an indication of this tendency, and such an attitude, I think, is quite appropriate. After all, in a crisis situation, we tend to be caught up in the immediate surroundings, and we tend to make rather self-centered decisions. But this is not the way to move things in the right direction. It is important in such times to look to traditional wisdom or open our ears to the wisdom of our elders. In that sense, Buddhism also has much human wisdom crystallized in it. I'd like to touch upon some of the wisdom that Buddhism can provide in this situation. In the current pandemic, what can Buddhism say to the world? We'd like to think about that. Furthermore, humanity is facing many severe challenges. What answer can Buddhism provide to these? Of course, there are many issues to deal with, but today I would like to focus on the issue of the trap of dichotomies. I'd like to also talk about fairness and sharing, which is a concept that Buddhism has promoted for a long time. Let's think about dichotomies first. The Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari is concerned that the post-corona world will become more and more of a surveillance society. He has warned of this risk. In other words, infectious disease control will become a pretext for controlling the populace and monitoring them more than before. He has warned that this might happen. And we might be forced to choose between privacy or health. This seems to be a very unreasonable choice. But he has warned that people might be made to think they have to sacrifice their privacy in order to be safe. I believe there are many other ways in which we choose between two false options. For example, we might think that we have to choose between coercive measures or democratic procedures. Democratic procedures take a long time to be achieved, so people think that coercive policies and measures need to be used to address the problem of a pandemic. We have heard of cases where apparently that was successful, where we're told that there is a contradiction between cleanliness and immunity. Actually, viruses that are not so strong in harming humanity are good for increasing our immunity. But if we try to increase the cleanliness too much, then our immune system becomes weakened. So imbalance is not important. An overemphasis on cleanliness may occur in the future. Another dichotomy is between distance and communication. There's also the dichotomies between urban and rural areas. There is already a medical gap between the urban and the rural areas. We are seeing that happen. There's also the issue of local government. The people in a locality know the issues there better than the central government. So there might be people promoting more, decentralization, whereas others will say that a centralized governance is better. And people may seem to think that you have to choose between one or the other. Or we might think there's a dichotomy between health and economy. People say, if we value health too much, then our economy will fall apart. But if economic activity increases, then our health will be harmed. I showed some examples of these dilemmas or dichotomies that affect us. We see that there are such dichotomies or dilemmas in many aspects of our society. However, if we choose one and discard the other, it won't work. We need to see both of, rather than seeing the two options as in conflict and choosing one and discarding the other, we need to hold on to both of the options and see how we can find ways to fill the gap between the two extremes. This kind of attitude is important, isn't it? So we need to tolerate the existence of contradictions, but have the physical and mental strength to, to live through that and try to address the situation. Let me give you an example of the masks that we're wearing in the pandemic. The mask has become an icon for us nowadays, hasn't it? It's become a habit for me to wear a mask when I go out nowadays. And if I forget my mask, I feel like I'm missing something around my mouth. Even experts didn't know that masks would be so effective to prevent infection spreading. When I had started wearing the mask, and when I went out wearing my mask, I got surprised about myself. When I see people not wearing masks, it made me feel very irritated. I never thought that before, but when I went outside wearing a mask and I saw people who weren't wearing a mask, I thought these people were very irresponsible or very selfish people. I was surprised by my reaction to this. Just by wearing a mask, I am now distinguishing between myself who's wearing a mask and others who aren't wearing a mask. Sometimes I felt anger rising in my mind toward the people who are not wearing masks. This is the trap of a dichotomy, isn't it? We very easily get trapped in the concept of dichotomy. Our brains seem to be good at recognizing dichotomies. It's a brain habit. If we are unaware, we tend to look at things in terms of dichotomies. If we're not very mindful, we will fall into this dichotomous thinking. We think of enemy and friend, loss and gain, usefulness and uselessness, wearing a mask and not wearing a mask. We tend to fall into this kind of dualism. So Buddhism teaches us that we need to always pay attention, not to fall into the trap of dichotomy. Otherwise, we might start to get prejudice and feel hatred and become aggressive towards others. So our perception becomes biased. When we are looking at things as what we like and what we don't like, then people that we like look really good, and people we don't like, we don't even want to look at, and we don't want to hear their voice. This leads to our perception being warped, and warped perception leads to suffering, just as Buddhism has always taught. The Japanese Red Cross Society is holding an event called Let's Learn About the Three Faces of the New Coronavirus. They say that there are three types of infection. The first infection is the disease itself, the viral infection. But they say the second infection is that of the spread of anxiety and fear. And the third infection is people being infected by thoughts of hatred, prejudice, and discrimination. In this way, there is a negative spiral that we can fall into. The first and second infections are difficult to avoid, but if we move on, we need to avoid moving on to the third infection in terms of hatred, prejudice, and discrimination. In Buddhism, we believe that everything in this world is based on a chain of events. As you know, there's the law of dependent arising. Something becomes the cause of another effect, and that effect becomes the cause of another effect. And this chain of events goes on and on. Hatred and suffering can lead to a negative direction, and we need to change that direction. That's why we have to be very careful not to be tripped up by the trap of dichotomies, and we need to look at things carefully and mindfully, accepting the dichotomies in the world. Buddhism has already taught that. When we are confronted with contradictions, we should not jump onto one side or the other easily, or fall into simplistic theories. We need to keep both of the opposites in mind and try to bridge the gap between the two sides as much as possible. This is a Buddhist attitude, I think. Of course, the pandemic isn't the only issue that humanity faces now. Another important theme this time is the SDGs, which is trying to address issues of the environment, the economy, problems of society, and problems of the human rights. The United Nations has proposed this approach to solve the issues humanity is faced. For instance, in the case of pandemics, if we continue in terms of environment, if we continue to consume more and more and more, our Earth will no longer be able to tolerate it. Nowadays, there's a concept of the Anthropocene age. And there's a sense of crisis about humans destroying their own environment. Geologically speaking, we are currently in a period that started 65,000 years ago called the Holocene epoch of the Quaternary period. And about 17,000 years ago, we moved on to another period, geologically speaking. But the impact of humans on the environment is so large that some people are saying this classification is inadequate. They're saying in the last 200 years, humans have had such a huge impact on the global environment that we need to refer to this age as the Anthropocene age, or the age where humans are the dominant influence on the planet. That is how severe our situation is. It indicates that the energy of humans is very excessive. The energy of the human mind is excessive in a way. Other living things are more in line with the larger flow of nature, but humans have so much extreme energy and desire that they destroy their own ecosystems. Of course, in this excess, there may be joys that are unique to humans, as well as pains that are unique to humans. Science and religion and art was also given birth to through this extreme power of the mind. But we need to think how to address these excesses of humanity. This has been a challenge for humanity since ancient times. It can be said that Buddhist philosophy is one of the ways to deal with this problem of the excessive energy of the human mind. Shakyamuni Buddha, prior to his Mahaparinirvana, on his last journey, said that he felt the vulture peak is very beautiful. The nearby forests are beautiful. Rajagriha is pleasant. It is, and Vaisali is a beautiful and pleasant place. There's a scene in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra where he comments on the beauty of the surrounding world. This may be an expression of the essential nature of the world as seen through the eyes of the Buddha. But perhaps he wanted to tell us that we as Buddhists need to become aware of the beauty of the world around us. It may have been one of the last messages that the Buddha wanted to confer on us. Environmental issues are closely related to economic issues. Our desire, the current economy tries to stimulate our desires, saying they are needs, and make us, consume more and be more and more active. We need to reconsider this consumerism. In that sense, there has been an interest in the relationship between Buddhism and economics. And there have been many studies on this topic. One example is Buddhist Economics, which was written by the economist Claire Brown. It was translated into Japanese last year. Claire Brown says that many people are aware of the problems of environmental damage and inequality of wealth, but there are obstacles that prevent them from taking action to change this. It is because of people have difficulty in changing their habits. That was an interesting point that she pointed out in this book. Habitus is often translated as habit, but the social researcher Pierre Bourdieu has given a deep analysis about this concept of habitus, so I hope you'll have a chance to read about that. By repeating the same action many times, certain actions become a habitus or habit. In the Buddhist terms, the existence of myself is the result of habit, we could perhaps say. The self is an entity that was developed through habit, and that ensures also our uniqueness in a way. But adjusting the habitus or the habit is the activity of ethics or morality, you could say. In our daily life, our economic activities and consumption activities need to be moved into a better direction by developing better habits. By adjusting our habits, little by little, we may be able to change our society and the world around us in the right direction. We can move towards more ethical consumption, for instance. If there were two products on the store shelf, maybe we will be motivated to choose the product that is better for the environment. That might be an example. Or if there are a number of competitors' products, we might choose the product of a company that is, more responsible in society. This is the sort of activity we can instill our consumption activities with. This is a change that we can start from today. We need to adjust the habits that have been ingrained deeply in us. I think that kind of perspective is important for us. From the very earliest times, Buddhism has already taught about ethical economics. Buddhism never taught economic activities of lay people to be anything evil. In fact, Buddhism encouraged a healthy economic activity, but Buddhism insisted that the economy must be just and fair. There are Buddhist suttas, criticizing unjust weights, unjust money, and unjust means. The Buddhism has always encouraged people to gain income through right livelihood, and business activities have to be just and fair. That's one point. And dana, or generosity, taught as one of the 6 paramitas and one of the 4 practices to attract people to Dharma, is also greatly emphasized. Dana, or generosity, is in a way training to let go of our attachments. We are often clinging to things very tightly, though we're unaware of it. But eventually, we're going to even have to let go of our own existence. Since if we are born, we must become ill, old, and die. But if we try to let go of our ego at the last moment of our life, it's too late. We need to train ourselves to let go of our attachments in our life. The Japanese priest Dogen said, unless you open your hand, you won't be able to grasp the flowers. Dana, or donations, is a training to let go of attachments, but it's also a teaching in the joy of sharing. In other words, dana, donations, has the concept both of fairness and of sharing. This is one point that the modern people can learn from Buddhism, and this is a point that Buddhism can, teach our society about. Societies that don't ensure fairness are actually vulnerable to crisis. For instance, if many people have to escape from a stadium or somewhere, if everybody lined up and went one by one out of the door, everyone would be able to leave. But if people panic and then they crowd to the gate, it's possible that many people will not be able to escape. That will lead to a second disaster. But humans are unable to take fair action just in a case of crisis. We need to train ourselves in acting fairly. That otherwise we won't realize that the best choice is to wait for your turn to go out. If we live in a society where we can't believe that we'll eventually get our turn, then our action will be turning towards a selfish direction. If we're not trained in fairness and waiting for our turn, we can't survive in a crisis. If we are trained in respecting other people's turn and waiting for your turn, then we will be able to address even the worst crises in an orderly manner. We need to aim for a fair society from a day-to-day basis, and we need to aim for a society of sharing. This is a principle that Buddhism has taught from its very beginning. Finally, I'd like to add one more comment. There's the Flower Garland Sutra, a Mahayana sutra. It says that all of the causes and the conditions of the universe may be condensed in a single grain of dust. Even in one or single dust or a single cell, the causes and conditions of the entire universe are crystallized. It is taught in the Flower Garland Sutra. So we humans are like a single cell in the body of humanity. If we can take care of ourselves, that also leads to taking care of those around us and everyone. This is the concept of interdependent origination of the Dharma realm. The idea that taking care of yourself leads to taking care of others, and taking care of others leads to a society that helps each other. Also, if you can equate helping others in society with helping yourself, we can achieve a really wholesome society. This is what we as Buddhists should aim for. Something that is good for me would be good for others and good for the society. If we can, remind ourselves of this and reflect that in our actions, it would be very good. I hope this will be another point you will think about during our 3 days of symposium. Buddhism focuses always on our action here and now. That's the main point. This moment that we're in now determines the next moment, and so on. We need to be mindful of what we think and what we do and what we say now. That determines what happens next. Thinking this way, from this moment on, we can be starting a change in the world. There's always the potential to change the world by changing ourselves. I hope that this conference will be a good cause and condition for all of us to work on these issues together. So I'll conclude my talk here.
Now we take the 5 minutes break. それではただいまに5分間の休憩をいただきたいと思います。
We'd like to have Professor Tatsuru Uchida also come on stage and give his keynote speech. Shall I introduce him? Yes, please. This is Professor Tatsuru Uchida of the Kobe Women's University. Even before we got started, we were talking to each other for 2 hours. I think we're already a little bit exhausted from that.
Episode say x square plus 6 plus 1 equal to 0 alpha beta হলে alpha square plus beta square নির্দিষ্ট সমীকরণ
Thank you for your very thought-provoking talk. I was just trying to soak it in after listening to what you had to say. At the beginning, you raised a very important point about dichotomies. It's true. Dichotomies become a template for our thinking, and it's hard for us to go out of it. When we say it's bad to fall into the trap of dichotomies, we're already making another judgment and falling into a dichotomy. Even though we know it's not good to, clearly say, judge things as being good or bad, we are habituated in looking at things as black and white, as good and bad. Personally, I have a practice to try to overcome this trap of dichotomies. There are various things we can do. There are ways to loosen the grip of this template in our mind. If you think there's one correct way to overcome your trap of dichotomies, you're falling into the same trap again. So when you face this kind of dichotomy, I need to relax a bit. One method that I use for that is I think about these two things and try to consider that they might be at different levels or different dimensions. If we place them on the same level and compare them, then we look at one as being good and one as being bad. But it's possible that they're in different dimensions, so they can't easily be compared. And these two things are mutually incompatible or are difficult for them to merge. When you face dichotomies like this, there are approaches you can take. When I face a dichotomy like this, I first say, I wish this dichotomy didn't exist. It's a problem for me. And I recognize it's difficult to find an immediate solution to the contradiction. We feel helpless when we face a contradiction that we are not able to solve. We have to accept that. Before you came, Reverend, I was writing a document for a magazine called GQ. I was supposed to provide consulting to my readers about different life problems in life. And I was writing on the issue of same-sex marriage. Same-sex marriage is where a man and a man or a woman and a man, a woman and a woman marry each other. Some people are in favor of it, others are opposed. How do you feel about this? I was asked, and I said, I didn't give an immediate answer. I said, it's a difficult question. There has been homosexuality since ancient times. Human sexuality expresses itself in different ways, so it's natural. We can't simplify human sexuality. There are many gradations to sexuality, yes, and it's also very diverse. It's not something that someone chose intentionally. Some people are born with a particular sexual tendency, and they can't do anything about it. On the other hand, traditionally, marriage was a social scheme to uniting a man and a woman. But sexuality is something that is natural, whereas marriage is a human, structure. Sexuality as a natural tendency is naturally in conflict with a human social construct like marriage. Trying to
比喩で申し訳ないんですけども、
make
ティラノザウルスを動物園で飼いたいんだけども、どうに飼ったらいいでしょうって言われてもね、それはね、もともと無理がある。
homosexuality compatible with marriage. I don't know if that's an apparent. In other words, you'd like to keep them in the same zoo, but it's difficult. The Tyrannosaurus is the sexuality, which is hard to control, and marriage system is like the zoo, where everything's under control. It might be difficult to control it that way. It might be better to leave the dinosaur out in the wild so that it doesn't feel too much stress. Even if people ask me to explain how to keep, a dinosaur in a zoo, I wouldn't have an answer for them. So I was saying, it's difficult to, keep a Tyrannosaurus rex in a zoo. But many of the contradictions we face are similar to that. There are things that are just incompatible with each other. If we try to force them into a union, it ends up in an unnatural deadlock. Harari talked about the dichotomy between privacy and preventing a pandemic. You see, this is a fiction of the mind. We need not think that it's a choice between one or the other. Recently, the technology to monitor people has expanded very rapidly. A problem in the sphere of technology is now impinging on human privacy. The privacy is a modern concept. The concept of privacy, of having a right not to be intruded upon, of having a sphere only for oneself, this idea of the internal sphere is also a modern concept. But monitoring technology is able to monitor every aspect of a person's behavior, not only external but internal. This is the result of the advance of technology. We don't know what will happen to this technology. Like in the European Union now, people are asserting the claim to the right to have their past be deleted from systems. And that's becoming a legal right. Even information on the internet, things that you wrote a long time ago, eventually are going to be deleted based on the right of the people. If people wish that their past be deleted, they can demand that their past writings or postings can be deleted. This is a technical issue, and if it becomes easy to achieve that, then that will become an option. Right now, the issue of privacy and monitoring seems to be a dichotomy or contradiction due to our context. Right now, they seem to be conflicting, but in the future, they may not be in conflict anymore. It seems like, surveillance and monitoring doesn't easily coexist with privacy, but there may be ways to allow their coexistence. The issue of COVID-19 is viewed by some people just as a bad cold, and by other people as a massive, crisis for humanity. And some people become furious if anybody goes out of the house without a mask on. Both of these reactions are extreme. It may be the result of fear and anxiety, but people can easily overreact. In the past, it was the alpha variety, but now it's the delta variety. Some people feel that these shouldn't even be viewed as the same disease. Though they're reviewed as COVID-19, some people say they should be considered as separate diseases. And methods that are effective for the alpha strain may not be effective for the delta strain. So even when we say youth, I feel this way about COVID-19, you're not clear which COVID you're talking about. And the virus continues to evolve and to change, and our environment keeps changing also. How the issue of addressing this pandemic effectively is changing from moment to moment. So we can tentatively take one position. Like we could say, some people will say, you know, it's just a bad flu. But then eventually, when the vaccine comes out, then you think it's okay. But if the vaccine doesn't prevent all the infections, then you feel scared again. I don't think that's bad. As we need to adjust our perceptions as we gain more information. We never reach a final conclusion. When new information comes in, then we might have to adjust our understanding. And we need to continually seek for a better solution. I think this is natural for us as a biological organism. In Buddhism, we understand that we're thrown into a world where our thinking is dominated by language. We want to free ourselves from the prison of the concepts of thought, of language, in order to see the things as they are. In the last year and a half, we have been sort of influenced by many different theories and rumors. Well, sometimes we've been delighted, other times we've been terrified. But the pandemic is not winding down anytime soon. Some traditional meetings, which had been continued for many years, are now falling apart. And there's a sense of crisis among people of faith that our connections in society are going to be lost. Traditional activities and religious customs are were already in decline before the pandemic, but with the corona pandemic, religious activity and ritual is practically going extinct. We need to find places to gather together again and find new ways of making community. We need to rethink, how to reestablish the connections and the traditions that we are losing. In the last year and a half, Professor, I suppose you have noticed that people have been prohibited from gathering together, and these communities have been damaged. How do you feel about the future of our connections in society? Are you very concerned about it, or don't you think that's such a serious problem? Up to now, people used to get together and have communication and enjoy things together. That's no longer possible. But such a situation has occurred not only in the pandemic, but in other times, such as during war or during natural disasters or during famines. Compared to war and famine, the pandemic is not as disruptive. It's not like our human connections are completely destroyed by a pandemic. So I think it's within a tolerable level. It's more difficult to get together than we used to, but it's better than people being slaughtered by bombing, or it's better than your friends being killed in a massive disaster. Of course, many people have died in the pandemic, but compared to war, I think our situation is still more tolerable. The Hyogo prefecture is under a declaration of emergency, so I've had to. Since last year, we've been holding occasional gatherings, So based on the situation, you decide whether you can have the meeting or not, right? Hyogo Prefecture, if there is enough beds in the hospital available so that people can be accommodated there, then we'll hold our meetings. The main issue is not the number of people who have the virus, but the availability of beds in the hospital. So we will hold a meeting and then wait for a while and then hold a meeting again. Then people will be very eager to come back to the meeting after there's been a hiatus for a while. And people are very eager to come together again. So people will try to regain what they lost during the hiatus. And we feel really sad when we have to say goodbye to each other after the meeting. But I tell people, you know, in the future, we will be joining together again, and we should look forward to that. It is important to have a place where people can come together when needed. Once the situation changes, even if we're not able to do activities in the same way we did completely, maybe we can do it in a scale or in a frequency like a half or third of what we used to. I think such restrictions are tolerable, and our activities are not so fragile or feeble that they will peter out or be destroyed by this situation, I think. After talking about the pandemic, I mentioned about environmental issues addressed by the SDGs, and I talked about the issues of the economy and consumerism. How do you feel about these? For instance, Professor, what are your thoughts on the SDGs? First, I was told by someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that the UN is trying to promote the SDGs, and he wanted to know my opinion about it. And the local government officials asked me what they need to do about the SDGs. When I heard the explanation from the man from the Foreign Ministry, I thought about it. The name SDGs is unfamiliar to people, especially in local governments, but the big point is that the United Nations is promoting it. There are about 190 countries in the United Nations, and it is an association of nation states. What is the main message that the UN is speaking on? There is an assumed enemy for the global nation state. It is actually their perceived enemy is actually multinational countries, multinational government, multinational companies, such as American multinationals and Chinese multinationals. We don't even know where Apple, Google, and Facebook have their offices. We think of them as American countries, but they're not actually American companies. Like, for instance, Apple has its headquarter functions in Ireland in order to reduce its tax burden. And the CEO was called to give testimony in the US Congress and was criticized for this. But businessmen may say, why do we have to pay tax to America? Why can't we go to and produce where the production costs are the cheapest, hire people where the personnel costs are the cheapest, and place our headquarters in the place that has the lowest taxes? That is very basic, they think, on the basis of capitalism. They're saying it's their responsibility to their shareholders to run the company as efficiently as possible. Otherwise, they're betraying their shareholders. So multinational companies have no commitment to the country at all, or the nation state. The multinational companies get many benefits from the governments, like they ask the government, they expect the governments to educate the people that they hire and they take care of their waste and develop the infrastructure for them to do business. So they're pressing, the multinational companies are forcing the governments to
で、まあ、企業が
deal with
今の世界のグローバル資本
all
主義における企業っていうのはその形なんだけ
problems
ども、
that they do.
経済成長ってしていくもんだから、もうグローバル化っていうのは止められないだろうなと思ってずっと手をこまねいて見ていたんですけど、
companies in global economy in that context, and they become totally globalized. But at one point, the nation states thought this cannot go on as is. They felt they cannot leave the world just in the hands of the multinational corporations. Especially, they were concerned about the environmental destruction. If the environment is destroyed too much, then only weeds will grow, and the companies will move on to the next place. The companies are profit-oriented organizations without ethic, and companies don't have to exist forever. Whereas nation states essentially have the aim of continuing forever and maintaining sovereignty over a particular area and maintaining the health and happiness of their populace. Nation states are supposed
企業ってね、株式会社とかいうものっていうのは永続性って全然必要ないわけですよ。今日起業して素晴らしいなんかねアイデアのこう商品やサービスを展開していって、で別のところが
eternally immediate profit, providing products and services and making money. The people who are quick at that are the ones who earn the most. Apple and Google and Facebook and Microsoft may or may not exist.
企業がなくなったとしても、全然誰もそれを責める人はいないわけだし、それを経営の失敗
years from now. But even if these companies disappear 20 years from now, none of the people in those companies who could care about it. So there's no human sense to capitalism at all. But the nation state is focused on continuity for humanity, whereas global companies are trying to make huge profits in as short time as possible, if possible, in a microsecond. So there's a serious incompatibility between the nation state and the multinational corporation. We're all struggling because of that gap. The SDGs is a statement from the nation states to the multinational corporations saying, you guys are going to have to accommodate our needs. They're sort of, making a duel against the multinational companies, and they're trying to regulate the activities of the multinational corporations. I think that's the essential nature of the SDGs. I see, looking at it that way. I can understand more clearly what message the United Nations wants to give to the world. Meanwhile, the United Nations might also have problems if the multinational corporations disappear. If we assume economic growth is necessary for countries, then there will be limits to regulation of the activities of companies. But if environmental destruction goes on as it is, the companies will become richer while humans become poorer and the environment is destroyed. On the other hand, the nation states cannot easily tell the companies to stop capitalism. So they're trying to find a solution to this dilemma. Many people would rather just say, we need to end capitalism. That's probably their real wish, but they dare not say that. So they're trying to make a compromise. One interesting thing about the SDGs is they encourage countries to work together towards a particular goal. In the past, there was a tendency to try to determine how we do everything.
協力してこれやりませんかみ
But
たいな。
in this case of this
クリスチャンはクリスチャンのとして
SDGs,
まま
we just
SDGs 参加できますし。
define the end to achieve that target or goal. So Christians could participate in the SDGs as Christians. Buddhists
なくてですね、何でも
could, work towards SDGs from a Buddhist perspective. Any approach is allowed.
全部まあその
Whatever we're doing in our daily lives can also be
なかなか面白いアイディアだな。
a part of the overall initiative to achieve the SDGs. I think it's a quite, interesting
にしておいたら本当に地
グロー
球が
バル資本主義って止める理屈ないですよ
idea.
そうなんですよ。
それ
It
は
shows if we let global capitalism to continue as it has, we're heading towards human destruction.
あと富の分
Yes.
そういうものですかね。
Issues of environment and of distribution of wealth are becoming more and more serious.
富は偏ってるし、
そうですね。
Though there's a terrible discrepancy in wealth and poverty. And the environmental issues are only becoming more and more serious.
うん
We're experiencing abnormal weather nowadays.
いや消費活動の帰結に決まってるわけですからね、どっかでブレーキかけていって、
はい
まあ、はっきり言う
We
と
can
経済成長を止めてですね、定常経済の方に落ち込んでいって、
deny
もう大量生産、大量流通、大量消費、大量廃棄っていうですね、今の仕組みをもうどっかで止めるしかないっていうのはみんな分かってる。
a stable state society, economy. We know that that's necessary, but nobody knows how to control capitalism except Marx. But no longer are we able to rely on the theories of Marx either. Marx looked at the capitalists as a personified entity of the capitalists. And he thought that we needed to, knock down the capitalists and redistribute the wealth to the poor.
角が立つんですよね。
But by
でそれがまあ結局これまでのまあ共産革命っていうのが最終的にまあ粛清とか強制収容所とかですね、いうところに行った理由がそうなんで、資本主義っていうシステムを擬人化して個人を悪人というふうにですね、そこに悪を凝集させて、それを切り捨てれば全てうまくいくんだっていう話じゃないんですよね。だからこれ我々が対処しなきゃいけないのはシステムなんですよね。個人じゃなくて、でもちろんこのシステムに関わってそれでもって大金持ちになったりですね、システムを利用して、まあ、大きな利益を得ている個人はいるのは間違いないんだけども、彼らは結果なわけであって、受益者ではあるけれども、張本人じゃないんですよね。彼らが別に資本主義を作ったわけじゃないわけで、それにうまく乗ってるだけの話であって、だからこの今世界の富がですね、まあ、何十人かのところに集約されて言われても、こいつらは悪人だわけじゃないんですよね。彼らはうまく立ち回っただけであって、システムはまたそれとは別に動いてるわけですよね。でこのシステムはとにかく、ね、何人かの個人の階級であったりね、その超富裕
our
層
system of class society cannot be resolved easily just by attacking the rich. There are 7 billion people on this planet. We all need to, control ourselves so we don't go towards a catastrophe. We need to find a good solution for that. We need to tie our legs to each other's legs to prevent anybody from running away and leading us towards disaster. We shouldn't personify evil. We need to think of the evil as a structural issue, a system, which is everywhere. But there are various, like legs to that structure, and we need to hold on to those legs so they don't drive us towards destruction. We, 7 billion people, need to hold on to the legs of this capitalist system so that it doesn't go running amok. That kind of a comparison may be easier for us to relate to, and we get the sense that we can do something to change the situation little by little. Be it environmental issues or be it human rights issues, We all wish that these problems could be solved, but we don't know even where to take the first step. It's hard to know what to do. And most of us would have difficulty changing our lifestyles drastically, though we've come to a very critical state. As 7 billion people, if we pull each other's legs and prevent us from stampeding towards destruction, maybe we have hope for survival. We need social participation. If we say certain criteria have to be met or you're not allowed to have rights, that's very dangerous. If we are, and people, if we are trying to criticize the capitalist system, but we're criticized saying you are benefiting from this system, you don't have a right to speak out, then that can also be a problem. That is a way of limiting the space for engagement. There are some people who say, if you want to speak out for society, you have to give up all of your benefits and wealth, but that is not effective. We need to increase the whole sum of the people who are trying to make a difference. There might be some people who are, holding really hard to prevent capitalism from running astray. Other people may just be using their little finger to try and hold it back. But people who are really very committed or dedicated to social issues get angry at people who are less dedicated. They say, you don't have a right to participate in this movement until you change your lifestyle completely. Those people probably started those activities with a pure intention, but in the process, they fall into the trap of a dichotomy, and they distinguish between committed people like them and less committed people like the rest. In the 60s and 70s, when I was involved in the student movement, I saw this tendency often. These people are trying to make society better, but the student activists started killing each other over minor differences in their ideology. They said you have to start by criticizing yourself. We were told we have to criticize ourselves, and we had to confess our sins of being part of the capitalist system. But due to the infighting among the student factions, the whole movement collapsed very quickly in a year or two. And so their standard at the time was who had fought the best. And they said only the people who had sacrificed the most were considered to be the best. People who were just trying to change their lifestyles little by little were considered to have no right to speak on political issues. They would make people silent, and they would kick people who are not committed enough out of the movement. But that just doesn't work. As you said, we need to lower the hurdle to participation so that anybody can join, starting with even a small thing. Yeah. When we think about the global environment, I mean, there are some activists who are doing everything they can for the environment, but they're sacrificing their family members. I mentioned about the flower garland sutras teaching that caring for oneself leads to caring for others and the world. This kind of self-care is something we should keep in mind. There are some people who seem to be doing very great work, but if the people close to them are suffering because of that, there's a contradiction. Well, I think if people are doing great work, there are cases when there may be some contradictions like that. There are some things that can only be done by people who are doing extreme efforts. I feel sorry for people who for someone who married someone like that, but on the other hand, if we need to be able to accept people who are only able to work on themselves. Many of us feel a bit of guilt, you know. If we have consumed a lot, we realize we have consumed too much. If we can just reflect on that and try to change our habits, that's a good start. Protecting the environment for the future is a task for all 7 billion of us on this planet. I spoke about sharing and fairness a while ago. Nowadays, I think fairness is being sacrificed. What will happen? I'm concerned that our society won't go in a good direction if this continues. Many people may feel that way. The issue of sharing and the issue of securing fairness. Do you have any thoughts on these points? Reverend Shaku used a very nice analogy of people lined up before an exit. If they took their turn, everybody could go out. But if everybody rushes to the exit, then they crash each other and can't go out. How can we achieve this kind of a fairness in society? It's a difficult question. Normally, someone very powerful will appear and force everybody to stand in line. And they will instruct the children to go out first. And then they will make some sort of clear criterion. There has to be someone very powerful who makes the rules and implements the rules. That's the only way that most of us have been able to practice fairness. This is where social fairness is achieved by leaving the power in the hands of one person. This approach is very dangerous, though. It's quite troublesome, but when people are crowding towards the exit, we need people who will step back and say, I'm willing to not be the first. If a few people will step back from that crowd and form a line, you know, if out of 100 people, if 10 or 12 of them agree to step back and get in line, then eventually others might also comply. Not everyone is going to agree to being last, of course, but it all depends on how many people who are willing to not be first. If there are 10 people out of 100 people who are willing to not being the first, then that group will regain its sanity in a moment. People realize that they were panicking and were losing sight of themselves and becoming very selfish, and they will feel ashamed about having acted that way. But if it's just one person, I'm afraid he would be ignored. If there were 5 out of 100 people who step back and try to make a line, that might lead to awareness. Accepting inequality is a way of creating fairness. If certain people are willing to get the raw end of the deal, they can make an impact. Certain people have to make a sacrifice so that other people are awakened to their selfishness. In the movie Titanic, when the ship was going underwater, we saw a similar phenomenon. They were able to, get the children and the women to go on the boats, and there were many people who were willing to be left behind in order for the more vulnerable people to be saved. There were many, the staff were very good about that, and the musicians also played music until the very end. At some point, if people can agree that others go first, that you be left behind, that can make a huge difference I think many lives were saved on the Titanic because some people were willing to not be saved. Not only did they save one life by standing behind, but they helped other people to awaken to themselves and behave properly and rationally. It enabled the people to evacuate in an orderly manner, and many lives were saved as a result. The person who sacrificed himself not only saved one person, but probably saved many people through that act. There are some people who have to be willing to take a sacrifice in order for that to have a ripple effect and create a just society. This is very different from some powerful person creating the rules and deciding who gets the priority and punishing those who don't comply. These people who are willing to take a self-sacrifice can be a source of awakening to those around them. There are cases that person might not have a seat on the life boat, or like in the movie The Towering Inferno, the people who stayed behind may have lost the option of saving their life. There is a risk for these people to get the run to the deal, but by their sacrifice, they can help the whole group to regain sanity. This is the sort of result that one can hope for. In order to achieve justice, some people need to be willing to accept injustice upon themselves. At the time after the Great Eastern Earthquake of Japan 10 years ago, I heard that there were some old people's homes, people who evacuated to a local school, and the kindergarten children also stayed in that school. The lower floors had been destroyed by the tsunami, so these elderly people and these small children remained several days on the second floor of this school. They had to stay there for 5 days. And eventually it took 5 days before they were evacuated from there. And there wasn't any water either. People there shared the food or whatever they had with each other and survived for 5 days until they were rescued. I heard this witness from the people. I asked them, didn't you get angry towards each other? And they said there were conflicts. They had no food, they had very little water, everybody was irritated, and they were feeling in a state of panic. But the little children from the kindergarten sometimes made a fuss, or the elderly people spoke to the children, and that helped everybody to calm down. The small children and the elderly people served as like a counterbalance to each other so that it avoided an explosive situation. Sometimes the children made a fuss and the adults had to calm them down. And that helped everybody to calm their nerves down and wait for the rescue teams to come. I think our society might be similar to that. A group that has some people who are weak in them is stronger to crisis than a group just of strong people. I have an experience about this. In a certain country in Asia, I made a visit. It's a country with many disparities and inequalities. That's the impression I got. It's a very unfair society, I thought. At one road, I saw there was a place where the road was narrow because of the railway, and it gets clogged very easily. But everybody would wait for the train to pass. Once they went past the trouble, everyone was able to move on smoothly again. But when it got crowded or jammed, then the cars would come from behind trying to get through. They couldn't believe that they could eventually get through if they waited for their turn. They couldn't believe that, keeping one's turn would help everyone to get through more quickly. There were cases that it took half a day or a full day to alleviate the traffic jam there. Having ability to trust in the fairness of society makes a big difference. If one can't trust in any fairness among other people, then it's very hard for us to behave ethically. The time of the East Japan earthquake, CNN came to interview the people. The CNN interviewed people of different faiths. They asked some priests and pastors of Christianity. They also interviewed some Islamic imams. They asked some rabbis of Judaism. They were asking, why did God allow such a disaster to occur? Each was trying to answer this question. They were doing their best to answer this very difficult question. In Buddhism, we don't think of a creator God determining everything, we said. We didn't think of it as being the result of a decision of God. The CNN reporter was very surprised by that response. Then how do you look at it? They asked. You said that in Buddhism, we teach of causes and conditions. When different causes and conditions come together, it brings about a situation like this. I explained that the Mahaparinirvana Sutra also explains about that. Apparently, they couldn't understand what I was saying at all. I wish they had studied a little bit about Buddhism before they interviewed me. I was a little bit irritated by that. The American plate and the Pacific plate, crashed into each other, causing the earthquake, I explained. And they said the Buddhists are blaming the earthquake on the American tectonic plate. That was a very wrong interpretation and completely misunderstanding what we were trying to say. They also asked why the Japanese were able to behave in such an orderly manner after such a disaster. There was a terrible mess after the Hurricane Katrina in the in the US. It was a terrible mess, and they were wondering why the Japanese were able to respond so calmly to the tsunami and earthquake. They were trying to make me say it's because we're Buddhists, but I certainly wasn't going to say such a thing. I didn't think that was the reason at all. I felt that up to now, people understood that cooperating and with each other would lead to a solution of the problem more quickly than acting selfishly. That's how I answered. In the northeastern region of Japan, the community was quite strong. That might have been a strength. Also, up to now, efforts had been made to maintain a certain level of fairness and equality in society. I think that might have been one of the reasons also for their orderly behavior. I finally commented on a passage from the Flower Garland Sutra. I've been very interested in the Flower Garland Sutra recently, but how do you feel about this concept that we are like one cell in the body of the planet, and that the universe is inside us, and we, are part of the whole universe, and that we are interconnected like that? How do you have, are there times that you feel this kind of interconnectedness with the universe? I believe you are practicing martial arts, and there's a sort of synchronization with the other person that you are, doing martial arts with. You may have experienced that. In martial arts, What we are practicing is to overcome the contradiction or the dichotomy. In particular, we're trying to eliminate the ego. We're trying to let go of attachment to the ego. That is the ultimate goal of martial arts training. Does the ego get in the way of your practice as a martial artist? Yes. Our fears, anxieties, hatreds, or jealousies, or over optimism, or unnecessary worries. These sorts of thoughts from ego always reduce our performance. The enemy is not the person you're facing, it is yourself. When we are swayed by the ego, we are limiting our own ability of body and mind. People may think that martial arts is a technique for overcoming an enemy, but it's actually a battle with yourself, right? Of course, martial arts can be viewed as a way of overcoming the enemy, but in order to overcome the enemy, in a true sense, you have to maximize your physical and mental performance. If you have someone you are being attacked by, if you have a capability of 100, you need to increase that 150 to 200 to 300. You need to have the technique to bring out the greatest power from yourself. And how do you do that? You do that by letting go of attachments to the ego. It may sound overly intellectual to talk about you letting go of the ego, but as you said, just as there is a world outside of us, there is a world inside us. The space of the ego is very, very limited, actually. I can't go out of my own body, of course. Where is the ego? I mean, we have ourselves up to our muscles and our joints, but we can't go beyond that. Does our skin have ego? Not really. I think that our muscles and our joints have ego, but our skin doesn't have ego anymore. And our cells don't have an ego either. And the mitochondria or amino acids inside of each of our cells don't have an ego either. The area that's moving most actively in the martial arts is not our muscles. It's a place that is underneath the ego. It's actually at the cellular level or at the level of your skin that you are engaging. Your skin is like the interface or a platform for interacting with the other. The skin doesn't have your own ego or the ego of the other person. So there's no conflict in the skin. When the muscles crash with the muscles, there's no conflict. But if skin touches with skin, it doesn't create conflict. In Aikido, there are cases where you can move the other person without even touching them using chi or ki, but the skin is an area where there is not the dichotomy between friend and enemy or self and other. When you can go to that level, then you can take action. Especially, that is what Aikido is aiming for. It's a type of synchronicity. Living beings, if they see an individual of the same species next to them, and if that individual is strong and makes a particular action, if you are moving very rationally and beautifully and smoothly, people are attracted to that. This is because it is advantageous for our survival. If there is something that is moving beautifully and rationally, everybody tries to follow that. And that's how in Aikido, we try to gain control over the situation. So we're working at a level below the ego, underneath the ego. The level below the ego is like the level of the amino acids or the calcium in your body. It's a world different from the normal world of humans that we are aware of. You try to go down as deep as possible. You always try to go in deeper and deeper. And that's also similar to expanding out to the cosmos. Of course, our perception of the external world is limited. Likewise, our ability to look inward is also limited. And beyond that, it is an unknown realm. The macrocosm and the microcosm are areas that are beyond our grasp, but we try to go as far as we can in understanding the internal world. That is martial arts. So that connects to what natural science is doing and what religion is doing or aiming for. We are at a interface between the known and unknown. If we were able to explain life simply, then there would be no need for religion. But religion emerged because we are facing something that is very complex and very multifaceted and beyond what we can deal with. Humans living with the self are faced with a very difficult dilemma and challenge. But it's also fun, exciting. The scope of our ego is very limited. The scope of our perception is also very limited. But what is really exciting is what is the interface with what is beyond the ego. And how you behave at that interface is most important. It can make us excited. It can excite our intelligence and it can excite our life force at that interface. The points that I had touched upon were dug deeply by Professor Uchida. We would like to take a break now and then move on to questions and answers. So we'll take a 5-minute break now.
Professor Shaku and Professor Uchida, thank you very much for the interesting discussions. Now we take a 5-minute break. And then after the 5-minute break, we move on to the Q&A time.
Thank you very much for an interesting discussion. Yeah, I want to listen to what you said later on again.
皆様、そろそろパソコンの前にお戻りでしょうか。
Have you come back to your PCs? Next, we would like to accept questions from our participants to Reverend Shaku and Professor Uchida. Please make use of this opportunity to raise your questions to our two speakers.
So now move on to the Q&A times. And then given the limited time, so we have only 15 minutes, and then probably we can take the 2 or 3 questions. So but if you are interested in questioning, so please feel free to raise your hands. では岡島さんですかね。はい、どうぞよろしくお願いします。
Okay, Reverend Okajima. I'm Tenbun Okajima of the Sotoshu sect of Zen Buddhism in Japan. Thank you for this very interesting discussion. The discussion about dichotomy really struck me. I was listening with great intensity. And in your dialogue, you spoke about fairness and sharing. And you explained how, whether or not fairness is achieved depends on how many conscious people there are. I want to do my best so I could be one of the aware or mindful people who could help contribute to a fair society. Now I have a question. When we look in the past, there have been a close relationship between religion and pandemics or plagues. There were cases where a plague led to increase of religion, or temples were built to pray for the end of plagues, etc. But currently, with the advancement of science, people no longer rely on religion for everything. It's an unrealistic and not a very good idea to rely just on religion nowadays. However, there are, phenomena and issues such as discrimination that science is not able to solve on its own, and in which we, people of faith, have a special role to play. As you mentioned, Reverend Shaku, you spoke about the importance of reading the classics when we're in a crisis, both in Japan and outside. When there were pandemics or plagues, how did the Buddhist people, address the issues of anxiety and the crisis around them? Perhaps we could learn from that experience of the past. Could you provide some hints or suggestions on how Buddhists have dealt with such crises in the past? May I say something? I mentioned about the plague by Camus. However much the pandemic increased, faith is important. This is a time to think about God. That was the message. There was a priest who ended up getting the plague and dying while saying these words. In Camus' writing, this priest was not given such a high evaluation. He didn't seem to be impressed by this priest. Camus perhaps expected the people of faith to have played a different role than this priest did. Professor Uchida, I think you're an expert on Camus and other French literature, but how do you feel about this? In Japanese Buddhism, there is an example. In the Hojoki, the concept of impermanence is described in the face of crisis. That might be one example of the response of Japanese Buddhism to crises. And in more recent times, there was the issue of HIV and AIDS became a big topic of discussion. The people of faith from around the world had issued a statement on the issue of HIV and AIDS at the time. If you look at that, you might find something that really fits with our present situation. When the Ebola fever spread and when SARS spread as well, these issues seemed quite distant problems for us in Japan. But this time, we ourselves have, had to face the pandemic. And now we realize how little concerned we were for the Ebola fever or the SARS pandemic that had occurred overseas, and how senseless we had been, how insensitive we had been. If you go one by one, there are many examples. In recent history, the HIV-related statement of the people of faith may be a good resource. And as was mentioned, will this pandemic lead to new movements within religion? Maybe so. We won't know for a while. At the time of the great Kanto earthquake in the 1920s, many religious organizations were formed and played a big role in society. And after World War II as well, there were some religious organizations that expanded very rapidly. After great crises, religious movements often arise. Maybe if we see society in the next few years, we might see some noteworthy changes. On the other hand, we of the traditional Buddhist schools need to speak out to the situation at hand. We can't remain silent, I think. From the spring of last year, whenever I have an opportunity, even though my knowledge is limited, I've been trying to say something about the situation we face. But traditional Buddhist organizations, up to now, have avoided to speak out about issues in society, especially in Japan. The Catholic Church is very outspoken, but Japanese Buddhist organizations have tended to be quite silent. And if we don't speak, people will no longer come to listen to what we have to say. In order to have people come and listen to us, even if we're a little bit off the target, we need to do our best to say something relevant. That's part of the reason that I've been active to speak out to the media. I hope that you young Buddhist priests in Japan will not just sit by and watch this pandemic go by, but think of what message you can present. Would that answer your question? Thank you very much. I will try to look into that statement about HIV by the religions of the world. May I speak a little bit more? Professor? There is a Father Panur who appears in the Plague by Camus. What did Camus feel about this priest? Camus was an atheist, and when the priest said that the plague was the punishment from God, he was critical of that. In the big story, Camus was very resistant to somebody simplifying the story like that. How could I say? In the plague, receiving the punishment from God and surviving forever in the heavenly realm doesn't agree to him. Camus' basic philosophy is we are frail and we might die tomorrow, but human life is still beautiful and valuable. If we have only one more day to live, we should live our best that one day. That was his view. He didn't agree to trying to think of yourself as your life as part of something bigger. Camus got tuberculosis when he was 10 years old. He almost was considered to be a dead person, but he was very talented and very healthy. But suddenly he got TB, when he was 17 years old, and he was on the brink of death. This is about Camus. But he didn't seek salvation to God or anything. Various people tried to reach out to help him, but he didn't agree to it. He wanted to save himself. He knew he might die tomorrow, but he did his best to experience the beauty of the world for the limited days left for him. Because life is limited, he was more aware of the sun and the sky and the stars around him. He was also aware of the terrible smells in the slum where he was staying. He was able to look at all of these things as gifts from the universe. He had tremendous sensitivity to all things around him. He decided to face the disease in that way. Among the people who appear in the plague, there are some people who didn't look at the plague as a big issue. They just considered it as one thing that arose in their life, and they did their best to respond to it. The most impressive person is a small official called Gran. He was a very low-level government official. He was staying indoors and writing a novel endlessly, but he joined a team of he organized a team of volunteers to help the people suffering from the plague at the risk of his life. He was a member of a team of volunteers that tried to rescue the plague victims. He could have just remained a petty official and after 5 o'clock go home, but he went into the volunteer team and did the best to try and prevent the spread of the plague. And when he was finished with that, he went home and kept writing his novel. He was doing this work, which was risking his own life as if it's ordinary work. And when the plague ended, he went back to his ordinary job, and he never boasted about what he did. And he went back to his life of working at the government office at day and writing novels at night. Camus was trying to depict that kind of a life, trying to live normally, even in an abnormal situation. And whether it's in war or in a natural disaster or whether in a pandemic, can we live normally? Can we do the best we can? This character, Gran, did the best he could, but he didn't try to do more than he could. He worked at the office in the daytime, and he took time to keep writing his novels at night. But he had some available time, and he dedicated that to volunteer work to fight against the plague. This stance of him was very striking. I think it's the resistance that he, pictured there. He thought that people who are able to risk their lives, but take that on as something normal, is part of their daily lives, is the ideal. People who were in the resistance don't boast that they were resistance fighters. They just dissipate and go back to ordinary life. That was the ideal of Camus. various types of people appear in the plague by Camus. Reverend Panunu and Glan and the other characters all had what you could say was a religious perspective, since they were, facing death seriously, and they were each thinking how to best help the people around them. But the priest ended up behaving the worst, and Gran was the most gentle and lived most normally. But I think this official Gran was a much more person of faith than the priest. He was living much more like a person of faith than the priest. If there's another question, please share it with us. Many people are holding their hands up, so it's hard to decide. How about the lady from Nepal? Could you please? Oh, many people are raising their hands.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. So first of all, namaste to everyone, and thank you for this amazing session and symposium. So my question is right now, after the COVID-19 and during the COVID-19, there are so many cases of suicide. And as we know that in Buddhism, suicide is also one of the bad things. Lord Buddha has also said that to kill yourself or to kill others is like a very bad thing. So as a youth, how can we aware others, or through the Buddhism, through the teachings of Lord Buddha, how can we aware others? So that's my question. Thank you.
通訳は使うのですか。
あ、すいません。今の質問はですね、仏教の教えを通じてどうしたらこの自殺という問題をですね、解決できるか。
She asked how Buddhism can address the increase in suicides that may be affected by the pandemic. First, according to the sutras of Buddhism, killing oneself apparently is not necessarily considered a completely evil thing. Of course, it discourages, the teaching discourage suicide, but it does not describe suicide as an absolute evil. Let me explain. Having completed some training and achieved a certain level, there was one person who was in so much pain from the disease that that person wanted to pass away without pain. And the Buddha said of this person, he is certain to go to Parinibbana, so you don't have to worry about him. Whatever, Buddhism does not absolutely negate suicide. At least that is how we understand it. However, but that was because this person had practiced meditation and had achieved a level where he was assured, liberation or nibbana. That's why the Buddha was able to say that to him. But that doesn't mean every suicide is acceptable. In Buddhism, we don't believe that this life is the end of everything. We will most likely carry on with our existence with a next life. Death is like a milestone or a gate to the next life. It's not that we will necessarily go to hell or go to heaven. Buddhism does not teach that suicide will make you go to hell. The karma of suicide will be carried on into your next life, we think. At a minimum, our life may not go as we wish, and we may suffer a lot in this life. Buddhism does teach us we must do our best to live out till our last day. In principle, suicide is discouraged. But if someone is in so much pain that they feel they want to die, Buddhism does think compassionately about them. If living is so hard for some people, we recognize that there are some people who choose to not live anymore. Buddhism does not apparently judge such people as bad. And that is how suicide is depicted in the Buddhist sutras or suttas. With that as a basis, how can we discourage people from taking their own lives? There is an example in the suttas. We need to become close to those people so that they be empathic to them. There was a person when a person was feeling in so much pain that that person wanted to die, the Buddha, Shakyamuni and his disciples went to him and helped him to wash his body and clean his clothes, and they brought food to that person day after day. They tried to stay close to that person so that person could have the motivation to live one day at a time. There is a story like that in one of the Buddhist sutras. So, as a Buddhist, what we can do is something like that, to try to be a friend to others. The important point is Buddhism never judges someone who commits suicide. It's true that some people suffer so much that they feel they have no choice but to kill themselves. But their suffering will be carried on to the next life if they do that. But what we need to do is to try to be as close as we can to the people who are suffering. That is what we have always thought we can do. I think those are the two main points I wanted to say. Does that answer your question? Can I comment on suicide? There has been an increase in suicides in the last year and a half, of course. There was an impressive story I heard. There are many high school students who are committing suicide more than before. I wondered why. And I was told it was partly because of the COVID pandemic. There are no cultural festivals, there are no sports activities, there's no school trips. All of the fun things in school have disappeared because of COVID, but they have to continue going to those classes. And in the early part of last year, these classes were closed for 3 months. And as a result of the classrooms, even though the classrooms were closed down, the students were required to study everything that they would have had to study in the classroom, even though there was no class. The Ministry of Education required the schools to finish the entire curriculum. So there was less time to complete the same curriculum. So the teachers were cramming the information into the students. Some schools were open until 7 p.m. until it was dark because they were required to teach everything in the curriculum for that year. But cramming the information from the textbooks into people is very dangerous. they move ahead, even if the students are not keeping up and understanding. The ideal is to explain again and again until everyone understands and then move on. But many people are left behind by cramming. Day after day, there are more and more students who can't keep up with the lesson and feel left out. And listening to a lesson that one can't understand is very damaging to the psyche. It's like you're feeling you no longer belong there. You have no right to be there. If the student can't understand what the teacher is saying, he feels very alienated. If this situation continues for several months, people feel like they're no longer recognized as a member to be there. They have no right to be there. They feel as though they are being told to leave. So these children need to feel that it's okay for them to be there, even if they don't understand. The sense of approval is lost. This is not my idea. It's what I was told by some school teachers. The sense of approval in the society being lost is related to increase in suicide, I think. When we feel weak is when we don't feel we belong there. If we can feel that we are accepted and appreciated for being there, that increases our will to live. But if people feel that they don't belong there, if we feel that we are unwelcomed, if we feel as though we're not even belonging to the class there, then we lose our will to live. Suicide increased most among the women who were casual laborers and lost their work. I think the situation may be similar in other countries also. When we lose our work, we feel we no longer are required. We're not needed. We feel like we're not welcome. When we're told you have to quit, when we lose a job, then we not only suffer economically by not having income, we also lose the social approbation or acceptance. We feel it's a very poisonous feeling to think that we are not wanted, and that it can be a very strong driver towards suicide. What we can do is exactly what you said, Reverend Shaku. We need to be close to others. The most important thing is to make people know we want them there. We need you. We need to send out that message. We want you. And we bless you for being here. We should step in that far to make people know that they are needed and wanted. This is something anyone can say. You don't have to be a priest to say that. We need to approve others and accept others. And furthermore, we need to bless others, or we need to express gratitude to others. Blessing and gratitude, these last two words are very religious words. In an age like this, everybody becomes a little bit more religious than normally because we have to. I heard a story last year in Japan. From April, May to June, many of the companies as well as schools were closed down. And I heard there was a sudden decrease in suicides. I also thought maybe, they got a relief by not having to go to school or work. But I also heard that women, especially casual women workers, went to suicide. There's a lady priest that I know. Apparently, there are one or two things that don't cause us to die. But if three causes come at the same time, we can no longer stand to live. For instance, Professor Uchida, if someone tells us that we are accepted here, we can reduce the the 3 factors to 2 factors so we can tolerate. Economic issues are like that too. If we can resolve the economic crisis, then people can survive. But if multiple crises hit us at once, we're no longer able to tolerate. So I think each of us have something that we can do for those around us to prevent suicide. Perhaps we're out of time. Can we have one last question? There was someone who has raised the hand for a very long time. From Malaysia?
Hi, Reverend. My name is Evie from Malaysia, and I actually have a question about what you pointed out about cleanliness and immunity, right? Because you have been talking about dichotomy and how we shouldn't just choose an extreme, but instead optimize our resources, which can be compared to how the Buddha did not choose the 2 extremes, but instead came to the middle way. So I was wondering, in this case, right, so since we talk about immunity and cleanliness, which is essentially about how much challenge should humans face, so I was wondering, in your opinion, what is the optimum amount of challenge that humans should challenge ourselves with? So if we think about technological advancement, right, and how technology is making our life easier, but at the same time also making humans more complacent, more lazy. So do you think this is something that is optimal, or do you think we should challenge ourselves more?
You spoke about cleanliness and immunity. I raised that topic because there are some people who demand a high level of, of cleanliness. They can't stand any kind of uncleanliness. I'm doing some consulting on TV, and a lot of people raise these concerns with me. For instance, a lady says, I'm holding my baby. Then someone will come and want to hug my baby, but I don't want them to hug it because I'm afraid that person might have dirty hands and give an infection to my baby. So some mothers raise this as a concern to me. As you point out, in Buddhism, we try to avoid extremes. Humans tend to go towards extremes otherwise. We try to control our bodies and minds with the concept of avoiding extremes in Buddhism. But normally, children are exposed to various viruses which aren't so virulent, and that helps them to build up their immune system. But if the baby is kept in a sterile environment without any exposure to bacteria, that child might have a weak immune system as a result. If that tendency keeps on, it can go to extremes. For instance, some people are afraid to hold the bar on the train or the handle, or they're afraid to touch the doorknob. People get more and more extreme and afraid to be contaminated. Ultimately, at the end, people feel that everything but myself is filthy and dirty. When you go that far, it's no longer possible to lead a normal daily life. And you'll be driving yourself into a corner, a very difficult life. So cleanliness and immunity are not a contradiction or a paradox. We don't have to choose one or the other. Yeah, that was the point that I had raised. Yeah. Did you have something, Professor? When I was young, I was eating brown rice consciously. I was following the macrobiotic diet, and I avoided eating meat. And I avoided chemical flavorings. I didn't take any sugar either. And I ate only organic vegetables with a brown rice. I tried that for half a year or so. I found I started looking more and more like an ascetic monk. All of the oil was lost from my body. I got quite healthy doing it, but there was a problem I faced. Food that other people were eating looked filthy to me. When someone's eating a hamburger or eating ramen noodles, it seemed to them that they're eating filth. I thought, oh, it's disgusting. They're eating something really gross. There was a time when I had no choice but to eat some ramen noodles. And as soon as I put the first noodle in my mouth, it almost made me want to vomit. I couldn't tolerate the smell of the chemical things. As my body became purified, my mind became more and more aggressive. If I saw someone eating junk food, I couldn't resist the temptation to tell them, you should stop eating that junk food. If someone was eating something sweet, I would tell them, why are you eating this sugar? It's horrible. When people are criticized for what they're eating, they felt hurt. If we criticize them for making fun, eating junk food, it's the same as saying, you are junk, you are made of junk. And people actually start to feel that way. I became very aggressive towards other people, and I rethought about this. I was no longer able to go and eat meals with my friends, and I became more isolated. I wondered what to do. I had to choose between friends or health. So I decided to give up on health and in favor of friendship. I decided to go eat with my friends and forget about my extreme food habits. When I was doing this microbiotics, everybody around me seemed to be filthy, eating filthy food. This is really dangerous to be in that way. It's almost as bad as getting infected with a pandemic. I was infected by the disease of cleanliness. We need to, over cleanliness or fastidiousness is a very dangerous disease, almost as dangerous as COVID-19. So let's try to maintain a balance. She asked about challenges. If our life becomes too easy, then we lose the challenges in our life. That might be your way of trying to retain a balance. You might realize that you've been leaning towards a very easy and lazy life, then you swing in the other direction. That is an appropriate Buddhist attitude of adjusting your direction. I've experienced that. I realize I'm going too far in one direction and I decide to move in the other direction. That is a new challenge for me. But then you tend to go too far in the other extreme. And then you realize I'm going too far in that other way. And I realize challenging myself too much might not be a good thing either. So you're swinging back and forth with the pendulum. I think that's the point. Yeah. You're really good at consulting people with their problems, aren't you? Thank you very much. We'd like to ask our two speakers to wrap up their speech. In 2 or 3 minutes, could you sort of give a summary of the main points? Thank you, everyone, for your participation. It was quite a long period of time. I'm sorry that we ran on and on. I respect everyone who organized this conference, and I admire your aspirations as participants, and I can feel all of you looking upon me, participating here. I'm really happy I was able to join this gathering. Buddhism is sort of a minority religion from a global perspective. There are many more Christians and Muslims than there are Buddhists. Actually, there are more Hindu believers than Buddhists. I doubt that Buddhism is going to become a dominant religion in the future either. We will continue to be a minority. However, the teachings of Buddhism are very important for humanity. I think we're proud for the teachings that we have received, even though we're a minority. Tomorrow and the next day, this conference continues, so I hope you will continue to participate. Thank you, everyone. Let me make a comment also. Thank you, everyone, for your participation for a very long time. Thank you for listening. The pandemic gives us an opportunity to think fundamentally and radically about the human situation. It has created a very religious experience for us. As you said, Reverend Shaku, often many religious movements started after disasters or crises. When something like this happens, we try to look fundamentally towards the issues of what is life, what is the world, what does it mean to live with others. These things that we normally don't think much about, we start to think about in a crisis. I hope this will be a good opportunity or a chance for us facing the global pandemic to think about things more fundamentally or radically. It's a wonderful opportunity. You young people, please think about these issues deeply and fundamentally. The fact that it's sad that the pandemic has spread this way, but this has given us an opportunity to really look at things from a more fundamental level. It's a great opportunity. So let's think deeply. And as Reverend Shaku said, let's also speak out. If it's the worst thing is to remain silent because you're afraid you'll say something wrong. If you do your best to say what you think and you say something wrong, someone else will point out to you that you're wrong. And then you can adjust your thinking. We need to keep trial and error. If we are remaining silent because we're afraid of saying the wrong thing, it's a big shame. So let's try to be outspoken about what we think and feel, even if we haven't been able to word it properly. Even if we lose our words along the way, we need not worry about that. Let's keep speaking out about things that matter to us. So I wish for your best effort in the next remaining 2 days. A final word from Reverend Murayama, please. Today, we were able to hear many wonderful topics. Under the corona pandemic, we have experienced many things and made various efforts and thought about many things. That will make a difference in the post-corona age. I hope this will empower us to live better in the future. That was our wish for organizing this meeting. We hope we can each contribute to achievement of SDGs. In the age of the paradigm shift and the Anthropocene, I hope we can shine a light of hope in our world. That was our wish when we planned this meeting. And we received many hopeful and passionate messages. We are really grateful from the bottom of our hearts for that. Thank you very much. With this, we would like to conclude the keynote speeches for today. Those of you who are participating from YouTube, the program for you will be ending at this time. Tomorrow, the second day, we will have a keynote speech on the topic of the 3 great religions of the world and the SDGs. We're looking forward to meeting all of you again tomorrow. Thank you for your active participation. So we'll be concluding the interpretation service at this time. Thank you, everyone.
You can hear. Can you hear me, everybody? Can you hear? Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, yes, can.
Great, thank you. So now we take a 15 minutes break, and then now after the break we move on to the central program of IBYE. It's an online international cultural exchange. So that we will start in 15 minutes. So please come back to in 15 minutes. Okay. All right. See you soon.